Everybody can hear me okay? Can you hear me okay? You can see me all right? Yes, yes, yes. Okay, great. Okay, so welcome to the webinar. I think we should start off with a poll about how hot it is, because I'm sure it's hotter here than anywhere else. It certainly feels like that. But welcome to this webinar about life skills and you, the teacher. Wherever you are in the world, I've been looking at the chat room, and I can see that people are joining us from all over the world, which is wonderful, and never ceases to amaze me how technology connects us and how we can all interact in this way. I think it's brilliant. Even though I do it all the time, I still think it's great. Right, so these are the kinds of things that I want to focus on during the webinar, and what I'm hoping you will get a better sense of after the webinar. So where I'm coming from with life skills is getting a better understanding of some of the things that underpin effective life skills, and these are things like optimism and resilience, which enable us to become more self-aware and develop these skills, and also to understand that these kinds of skills can be developed in others, and actually you, the teacher, have got a definite role to play here. So I want you to, hopefully by the end of the webinar, have a bit more confidence in your ability to deliver life skills and help other people to develop. There is a global skills gap that is currently emerging all over the world, all different parts of the world. There's a recognition that these kinds of skills are needed, and a better understanding of the role that teachers play in plugging this gap. So life skills is getting more and more recognition in the education sector, but it's still relatively new, and it's still a new area for teachers. And I was asked with this webinar to tackle some of the basics, or revisit some of the basics. I don't know how many of you have attended a life skills webinar before, but I will be revisiting some of the basics in this webinar. So maybe if you could just start by typing in the chat in the chat room what you think life skills are. It would just be interesting for me to see what you think they are. What would be some typical life skills from your perspective? Competitiveness, yeah, that's an interesting one, Tatiana, because I was just thinking about that before the webinar started, but actually we do need to relearn how to be competitive in life. So we've got work-life balance, collaboration, communication skills, poor sound quality. I don't think that is, but maybe that, well, that could be listening. Often there's a poor sound quality when we listen. Something we use in everyday life, time management, empathy, social interaction. Okay, so lots and lots of different things. And actually, when we talk about life skills, people will refer to them in lots and lots of different ways, and they can actually include really basic things like how to open a bank account and you know, being independent, as well as all the things that you're talking about around teamwork and communication and managing time and so on. So they're gaining a lot of recognition, and they're often referred to as 21st century skills, soft skills, so you might hear all sorts of different terminology for them. And I suppose the foundation for all of this from my perspective, so where I'm coming from as a trainer, is that I believe it's about people looking at themselves and having an awareness about themselves, and therefore begin to understand how they can develop some of these skills. And although there are lots and lots of different terminology for soft skills and for life skills, which is why I've got these images here, because usually when I ask people what they think these skills are, they will come up with lots and lots of different descriptors for them. And that's because there is still uncertainty about specifically what some of these skills are. So it's quite easy to define things like opening a bank account, managing your time, those kinds of things. It's harder to define some of the softer skills that are linked to yourself. But one thing that everybody does agree on is that it's the behaviours that are actually more important to success. That's either in the workplace or actually in life, and that these behaviours are more important than knowledge or skills. And this is quite an important thing to accept, actually, because a degree and qualifications alone aren't sufficient anymore. Everyone all over the world is striving to get the degree and the qualifications and the skills. And those are the things that you must have. They're like a threshold thing that you must have. They're very, very, very important. But beyond that, it is the behaviours and the softer skills. And if we think of the ideal profile for somebody, so whether this is somebody, you know, joining the workplace, or a student in your classroom, or even you yourself, or me, okay, this is the ideal profile, that you have the knowledge and the skills that hopefully you've gained from your education or from your training. But the third triangle, the behaviours, you also have those, and it's these that are lacking in the education system at the moment. They're not consistently taught, although it's recognised that we all need them. So there is a gap here, and it's these things which education has not been very good at developing, and it's in a state of flux. So this is the ideal profile of somebody who has got the knowledge and the skills, but they also know, have a strong sense of awareness about their behaviours and about their softer skills. So I like this. I think the future is soft in terms of what we need to be working on and developing in education and in training. And some sort of factors around, so I want to kind of set the scene a little bit as well around why we need to have these skills. So what is the rationale for why we need to have these skills? And soft, when I say the future is soft, I don't mean that it's going to be easy, not soft in that way, but it's soft in the sense of that the softer skills are what we need to be developing. So if we think about the workplace, this is a fairly recent research that came from the UK Commission for Employment and Skills, and this is looking at how people are working at the moment. So most of us are working at very, very high speeds, and this is getting faster and faster, and it's probably speeding up. And 60% of us work under very tight deadlines for most of the time. And we have much, much higher workloads, so sort of generally speaking across different kinds of jobs. And you may perhaps recognise yourself as teachers, you probably have high workloads as well. There's a lot of competition, so people have a fear about losing their jobs. And we haven't really yet learned how to manage our technology. We're still working out how to manage it. And, you know, you will read a lot of things around the negative side of technology, but I think it's important to remember that throughout history, whenever there's been anything new in terms of development, whether it's the motor car, or whether it's could be another form of transport, that when people started driving cars, nobody knew how to drive a car. We had to sort of learn it, and gradually we had more regulations and more guidelines and so on, and it's kind of similar like that with technology as well. You still have to learn how to manage that technology. And I don't know how many of you work with which groups of people you work with, or whether you work with teenagers or young people about to enter the workplace, but whatever age group you're working with, the future of work is changing as well. So at the moment, employers will ask for soft skills rather than technical knowledge. And I've seen this in lots of different countries, not just in the UK. I was in India recently looking at what kind of skills people need when they enter different industries. And the first thing that came out of all the employers' mouths was the soft skills. And that tends to be a kind of global thing, that these skills are lacking and they're not there. And companies will say, we recruit for attitude and we train for skill. And what that means is that, you know, people have the qualifications, so they're not, you know, if they wouldn't even be in the interview if they didn't have the basic sort of premise to be able to work in that in that particular job. So they're actually looking for people with the right kind of attitude, and they don't worry too much if there's a bit of a skills area that needs to be worked on, because they'll do that on the job. And then you've got some other things around here around what the employers are looking for. And I think what's interesting about this is that many people say, oh, well, you know, we don't really know what these soft skills are, and we don't really know what employers want. But actually, the employers are telling us what they want. And these are the things they want. And some of them are very simple things. If you look at punctuality, for example, and having this open, lovely, open, positive attitude towards work and towards communicating, these are quite, you know, basic sorts of things. And once they're in the workplace, it'll be around the problem solving and critical thinking and adaptability, those kinds of things. And if people are self-employed or, you know, starting something themselves, then they need all of this and more, and, you know. But obviously you'll hear variations of these kinds of things depending on what study that you're looking at. So what we need are the right skills and tools for the world that we are actually now living in, that we're living in right now. And this is where the life skills come in. And this world that we're living in right now, there are a number of things that are happening within it. You know, we are information rich, but we're knowledge poor. You know, we're bombarded with information all the time. But actually, it's not translating cleanly into knowledge, because we are not necessarily evaluating that information as well as we can, or as well as we could. We're dealing with a lot of rapid change all over the world in different sectors. The workplace is very different. So, you know, many of us might have entered the workplace in a very predictable kind of way in terms of studying and then some work experience, perhaps going to university and then going into your job. And all of that is changing now at every level and every age. So the workplace has become different. It's much harder to find work. There are lots of jobs that haven't been invented yet. We need to be teaching young people entrepreneurial skills, not necessarily so that they can start a business, although of course that's great, but so that they are able to be creative and inventive when it comes to perhaps creating new jobs that aren't actually there yet. Focus is one of the #1 skills that we lack. This is something that again, as a result of a recent study, that the actual #1 skill that people need is focus, the ability to focus. And that's why also you will see a growing trend for practicing mindfulness, for example, because practicing mindfulness actually is proven to help you develop your ability to focus, and also helps you to develop your ability to have empathy. And empathy was one of the things that one of you mentioned earlier on in the chat room as being an important skill. We need these skills like resilience, optimism, and adaptability. I think they underpin the other skills. So if you're able to develop some of these skills in yourself, or you have someone who's helping you to develop them, then chances are you will be a good team player. You will be responsible and accountable for the work that you do. You will, you know, turn up on time and all that kind of thing. This is another study which is quite interesting. It was done a few years ago by Pearson, and it again is looking at the fact that education isn't addressing this growing need to focus on these behaviours. And actually, the fact that education isn't addressing these needs isn't anything that new. The discussion around education not addressing these needs has been around for a long time. It's actually been around for about 15, 16 years. So we still haven't, you know, worked it out or got it right. So, and as we move into a more knowledge-based economy, then these behaviours become even more important. There's a particular lack of anything for teenagers that offer something that focuses on behaviours. And then this last point, which again is quite a crucial one, is there isn't any industry standard. So there aren't qualifications in this. There aren't measurements that say you've reached a certain point, and that makes it difficult as well. So this is not new. So these competencies, these life skills, all of these things are not actually new. They've been around for a long time. This discussion has been around for a long time, and this global need has been around for quite a long time as well. So I'd like to do a quick poll with you. And when you think about life skills, what is the most important? Is it A, your character? Is it B, your self-awareness? Is it C, your life experiences? D, your education? And E, your upbringing? I was going to add some more. I've got actually far too many, but you've got 5 options there. So which for you is the most important when you think about life skills in terms of how you develop them? Okay, quite a few. A's character, life experiences, your upbringing, okay, self-awareness, yeah, okay. Now, this wasn't a trick question. I mean, actually, all of these things are important, and all of these things will contribute to your ability to have some of these skills. So where are we? C, your life experiences seems to be the most, although we've got a lot of people who haven't actually responded. So we'll see more. Okay, interestingly about life experiences, because how do we gather life experiences? We gather them by, actually we gather them by becoming older, don't we? As we become older and move through life, we have more experiences, and we hopefully develop through those experiences. Now, what's interesting and important about this is that, of course, young people don't have the life experiences necessarily, unless they've got parents who are, I don't know, giving them education in different countries and taking them all over the place and exposing them to lots and lots of different kinds of experiences. They won't necessarily have those. So, but the key one that is really, really important is B, which is your self-awareness. And that's because self-awareness is something from which everything starts. The more you know yourself and understand yourself and how you tick, the better position you're in to develop these kinds of skills. And I'll explain more about where that comes from. I'm getting some messages in here that the sound is not clear. I'm hoping that's not my end, but Henry, you'll let me know, I guess, if it is. So, yeah, actually, Magda, that's a good point. So just maturity doesn't necessarily mean anything. Maturity by itself does not mean that you will have that wisdom. It is the self-awareness. That's where it all comes from. And if you look at these slides here, this is, again, building the argument that your effectiveness, most of your effectiveness will come from emotional intelligence, which is linked to self-awareness. That's why I've got this here as a theme, because you can't really get into self-awareness unless you also bring in emotional intelligence. On the right-hand side, what you see here is that the quality and history of your personal relationships are the only source of competitive advantage. So when you're looking at where you are in the world, what you're doing, how you're functioning in the world, how you're working, how you're being, how you're relating to others, the only thing that distinguishes you from other people will be your relationships. So that's why it's really, really important to have very strong self-awareness, to have very strong communication skills, and to build those relationships. When it comes to getting work and so on, it's all about relationships. And this is the premise of emotional intelligence, which of course you can read more about. I can't I can't cover every single aspect of EQ within this webinar, but it is something that you can read a huge amount more about. It comes from Daniel Goleman. But the important thing about this is that self-awareness is the cornerstone of emotional intelligence, and that's agreed across all disciplines and across various schools of thought, that it is self-awareness from which you build everything else, from which you build all these other things that fit around this main box of EQ. And what is emotional intelligence? This is a definition of what it is. Basically what it's saying is that to be successful, and let's be clear about successful, not necessarily, depends how you define success, but to be successful in the sense of being happy and productive and, your well-being in life and work, this requires you to be able to effectively control and manage your own emotions and those of other people. So EQ is about understanding yourself, your goals, your intentions, your responses, why you behave in a certain way, and managing those appropriately. And the second component of EQ is being able to relate to others. So having an understanding of others, their feelings, their responses, their mindset, and how you manage yourself in relation to those others. And one of the ways that you develop and improve emotional intelligence is by learning and practicing new skills. Okay, so EQ is really, really important for developing these kinds of life skills, some of which you've mentioned earlier in the chat box. So critical thinking, problem solving and decision making, being proactive and resourceful, being a great team worker, and being a leader when you need to be. And these two things are important because actually, there isn't really such a thing as going on a course to learn leadership skills and then being a leader, and that's all you are, because actually you're much more likely to have to dip in and out of being a leader and dip in and out of being a good team worker. And I would also argue that a leader also has to be a great team player. But it's also important for developing things like confidence, health, physical health, mental health, being productive, and for managing stress. So for lots of different things, it's that emotional intelligence and self-awareness that's really, really, really important. Okay, so that's some of the argument behind it, and that's some of the concepts in terms of the self-awareness aspect. So let's talk now about how we develop these kinds of skills. So, and I would say here that anyone who is hoping to work with others to develop their skills in these areas, you have to be willing to work on yourself, and you have to start with yourself. And as teachers, you have to start with yourself. Yes, I can see someone saying it's difficult to manage stress. Yes, it is. And that's, again, having a good understanding of how you deal with stress. What is your approach towards stress? Do you fight it or do you avoid it? Because actually there are only two responses to anything in life, and that's fight or flight. And these two responses are linked to sort of primal, old habits and the way that we resist to things. So you will either fight or you will fly. You will avoid it. And it's learning how to override some of those responses. Okay. So again, another quick poll. What is the best way to develop some of these skills that we've talked about? Is it in the classroom? Is it from your parents, colleagues, friends? Is it reading about them? Or is it going through challenging experiences? Okay, lots of going through challenging experiences. Lots and lots of going through challenging experiences. And again, that's quite an interesting one, because do we need to go through challenging experiences or put ourselves through challenging experiences to develop these skills? And yes, you will develop skills through that, but shouldn't we be trying to develop some of these skills a lot earlier? And that's where we would be looking more at A and B. And of course, what I want to look at is A, how can these skills be developed more in the classroom? But yes, you will develop them in different ways, and people do develop them in different ways. But again, you can go through challenging experiences and not necessarily become more self-aware as a result. So sometimes that needs a lot of support, and especially if you're a young person going through challenging experiences, you will develop resilience and you will develop adaptability and all those things. But I would argue that you're only going to develop them if you've got somebody supporting you to do so, and if you've got a network of support around you to be able to do that. So let's look at some of the ways that these skills can be developed. We have to learn these things by going through them, okay? And in a sense, you're absolutely right. The life experiences are going to be the best way to teach some of these skills. But if we want to teach some of these skills in the classroom, we have to give learners experiences where they can try and develop some of these skills, okay? So this is really about, for me, this is very much about experiential learning, so that you are working with someone to take them round this circle, this kind of workout circle, so that there's an opportunity for them to experience something, so experience an activity with you in the classroom, so that they also get a chance to do these other things. Now, a lot of training, what a lot of training does, especially soft skills training, is it starts with the experience, okay, the activity, and it ends with the review, which is number 2. But there's nothing for number 3 and 4. There's not enough of number 3 and 4. And actually, for somebody to really learn, they need to be taken around the whole of that cycle in order to internalize that experience and to get and to raise their self-awareness from that experience. So this is an old model research that's very, very well known. You may well have come across it before, but it's how we recall learning. It's how we experience learning, and the time frame within which we recall it. And as you can see here, that time frame is very short. So if we have very kind of lecture-based learning or things that are not interactive, the recall after just 3 months is very, very low. Whereas if we have more interactive kind of learning, more experiential learning, then that recall after 3 months is actually relatively high. Okay, so this just gives you a kind of indication of, obviously, I'm sure all your teachers include lots and lots of different kinds of activities in your teaching. But in terms of building self-awareness, this is really, really important, because you can't learn how to be a good communicator or a good team player by going to training that just gives you exposure to some techniques or to some slides. It's not going to be sufficient. And this next slide, I think, is quite interesting, because it shows you here the kinds of activities and the impact on the learner, and likewise the skill of the facilitator. Now, all of these activities that you see there in the middle, they're all different kinds of methodologies, and they require different kinds of skills on behalf of a facilitator or on the behalf of a teacher. And if you're focusing on developing people's self-awareness, you're going to be much, much higher up here, where it requires you to become more of a facilitator to enable people to develop that awareness. And if you look at this model here, at the very, very top, you've got real life experiences during the session, which are debriefed effectively, so taking people around that learning cycle that I was talking about. That's when you'll have the highest learner impact and learner involvement, and that's where you will raise that self-awareness. So what you should be doing all the time in terms of developing life skills is raising people's self-awareness. And that's different to what we as teachers normally do, I think, because a lot of the outcomes can be very, very spelt out, whereas for this, it's actually harder to spell out what those learning outcomes might be. So I want to just now, to end the webinar, I want to go through some practical things that you could maybe think about doing within your teaching. And life skills classes, I mean, these exist, and again, I don't know how many of you actually teach in life skills classes specifically, and maybe you don't, and maybe it's something that you would include in your teaching. I'm looking at a comment here about role play. Actually, let me just go back here because I think it's quite interesting. So role play, that is right in the middle of this, okay? Role play in terms of language learning is good, yeah, it's good. But when we're talking about behavior change and life skills, it's not so good. And the reason it's not so good for that, it's good for language, but if you're talking about softer skills, it's not so good, because if I'm looking at my behavior and I'm being given a role to play, I'm going to play that role. I'm not necessarily going to behave like I normally would if I was under stress or under pressure or something like that. So what we need to work towards in terms of awareness is up here, where actually that person is experiencing something which is taking them out of their comfort zone, for example, and that's where they will develop the self-awareness and the other skills like adaptability. But role play is good for language. Right, okay, so life skills classes can be formal kind of specific life skills training which would use experiential learning methodology. Someone's put games here. Yes, games are a good way of developing life skills. There are all kinds of things that you can be using. One of the things that is quite helpful, can be quite helpful, whether it's for you or whether it's for students, but it's quite helpful to have things like a Myers-Briggs test, which looks at aspects of your character. So in the poll, character is one of the things that's important for life skills. What's important here is about having an awareness of your character, of who you are and why you might do things a certain way. So these kinds of things can be really, really helpful for people to get an understanding of where they might be and where they might sit in terms of their personalities and themselves and getting feedback. And people like to do these kinds of tests because it's about them. And can be good for practicing English as well. Some other ideas here that you could think about are helping students understand what they have control over and what they haven't. One of the exercises that I do with people is I get them to bring a problem or issue that they have. Could be anything, it could be a deadline that they've got to manage, or something else that's challenging, and actually analysing what they have control over and what they haven't, because most of the time all of us will place energy on the things that we don't have control over. So we'll focus on the things we have no control over instead of putting our energy in the things that we have control over. And I could talk about this for a long time, actually, because there's lots of interesting research about the brain and what, if you are allowing your brain to give energy to the things that you have no control over, you're using up a resource that you need for looking at the things that you do have control over. So it's actually quite important to train students or train ourselves to be focusing on those kinds of things. And it's not easy, I agree, but you can get them to start doing it in a very practical kind of way. We need to provide students with lots of problem-solving opportunities so that they can look at lots of different kinds of solutions and consequences and then make a decision. And within that problem-solving, of course, you can then give them opportunities to listen and practice empathy, to work in teams and reflect on what's helping to make that great teamwork. Sometimes when I talk to universities or colleges, they'll say, yeah, we give our students, they get lots of training in teamwork. And then when I ask more questions about that, what I'll find out is that actually they're given opportunities to work in teams, but they're not given opportunities to reflect on what they're doing in that team. And to actually start thinking about what's contributing to the team working well or not working well. So very little is done in that area where they can reflect. So next time you're doing any kind of problem solving with students, get them to reflect afterwards, take them round that circle and get them to reflect on what they're actually doing and how they're listening and what contributes to listening, real listening, active listening, where you are totally present and we're totally focused on each other. You could just do 5 minutes of that at the end. It doesn't have to be a long time, but it will help them to be thinking about these skills. The comfort zone is an interesting one, and it's another exercise that I will do with students. I'll come back to that question, Kate. If people don't want to be in a team, what can we do to help? If somebody reminds me at the end, I'll come back to that. Comfort zone is an important one, because if we want people to grow and develop, we need to get them moving out of their comfort zone and experiencing what it feels like to be in the slightly stretched zone, which is the good place to be, rather than in the panic zone, which is where we will retreat. We won't be as effective. And if you're working with young people, this is really, really important, because if we want young people to develop adaptability, they've got a little they've got a little mechanism in their brain. Don't ask me what it is, because I'm not a neuroscientist, but they've got something in their brain which, particularly during the teenage years, they can learn to become more adaptable. So we need to be getting teenagers to go out of their comfort zone and to really try out lots and lots of new things, even scary things, because in that way they will develop their adaptability skills with support. But they've got an opportunity during the teen years to strengthen that muscle of adaptability. It doesn't come back. I mean, you can obviously continue to develop it as an adult, but particularly during the teenage years, we've got the opportunity. But what do we tend to do with teenagers? We tend to, in the West, we tend to protect them. We don't tend to let them go out and try lots of new things. Actually, we need to do a lot more of that. And one of the reasons why it's so important to expand that comfort zone is because we all naturally resist change. Every single one of us, without exception, wherever you come from, myself included, Henry, everybody, okay, when confronted with something that is change, an immediate response will be no, okay? All you've got to think about is just getting people to change where they're sitting after a break. People don't want to change where they're sitting after a break, right? We don't like change, okay? So we naturally have these little voices in our heads that will say, oh, I can't do that, it's going to be too hard for me, I won't manage it, and so on. So we've got to, again, override that and help people to override that so they can actually become more receptive to change. And that can be the littlest things, just become more receptive to change and gradually build from there. Taking part in sports or other group activities are really, really good for developing life skills, and also really, really good for developing competitiveness skills, which is one of the first things that somebody typed into that chat box. It's so important that we are okay with being competitive, because life is a competition and it's becoming more and more of a competition. So taking part in sports can help us develop those kinds of skills and become better at being competitive. And also, reflect on strengths and weaknesses and what we tend to do and how we tend to do it. So sports, group activities, games, all of these things can be a vehicle for looking at how you work in a group and how you work in a team. And really, really effective, really, really good. If you want to, develop yourself, lead something, do something, take something on. This is you as a teacher, okay? You as a teacher. So you developing something in yourself. Again, the more things you can try out, the more things that you can do differently, the more different approaches that you can take, you are also then developing these skills in yourself, which is really, really important. Again, this is something that, I guess, not sort of specifically within education, but within the community, and you will definitely learn to deal with people. One of the things I do is I run a choir with 100 people in this choir, and I can tell you every single day I learn so much about how to deal with people. I have learned so much about how to deal with people. So you get out there doing stuff helps you to develop these skills. You have to get out there and do things. Really, really important. We need to take more risks, make more mistakes. This is how you develop your ability to be resilient. So, it's about embracing failure. Excuse me just 1 minute. Sorry, I'm back. That was my son. He's broken his arm, so he's just coming to say hello. So yes, we need to not be afraid of making mistakes. and not be afraid of failure, because actually the more you go out there and the more risks you take, the more you're building up that resilience muscle. And what happens with young people a lot, especially when they're going out into the workplace or going out to apply for jobs, you know, they'll go and apply for 4 or 5 jobs and get rejected 4 or 5 times, and they kind of give up. And we all do. We give up really, really, really quickly. And actually, you've got to keep going out there, keep getting rejected over and over and over again, because that's going to lead you to the opportunity, and be better at understanding rejection, understanding that we make mistakes, and being okay with it. I make mistakes all the time. Every single day I'm making mistakes. And yes, not laziness. I completely agree with you. It's not about being lazy. It's about being human, and about recognizing that, you know, the more risks you take, the more things you try out, the more likely you are to make a mistake, right? I mean, that's, you know, that is human. You are likely to make a mistake when you're trying out lots and lots of new things. But that's where the most learning is. And we need, again, you know, we need to be doing a lot more of that. We develop a love of lifelong learning. That's where this is coming from. So we never stop learning. We never stop developing. That's teachers, students, anyone. Never ever stop learning. And this is about managing your own time. So as a teacher, and in terms of your own organisational skills and what you're doing, you know, teachers have a more and more higher workload. And again, it's about having a much better understanding of how you're managing that workload, how you're managing your ability to be productive, and how efficient you are and how effective you are. If you're not confident about giving presentations, get out there and give them. Give more presentations, okay? Because you will develop lots of style, presence, and communication skills. So we need to get used to getting up, giving presentations, getting students to get up and give presentations as well. Really, really important. Another kind of unexpected way to develop life skills is through video games, because these things strengthen the parts of the brain that are around creativity, are around the reaction time and the motor skills. So don't be afraid to use these kinds of games in class, or if you're allowed to, or with your children, young people. These can be used. I talked earlier on about managing your devices, and that's again about technology, and how we work with technology and how we use technology. That's going to start with yourself. Think about how you're using technology, how you work with it, how you respond to it, how you react to it, and how you're using it. That's really important as well. Listening and empathy happen by taking opportunities to practice that and giving students opportunities to practice those kinds of skills. So I'm not talking about listening in the sense of language listening. I'm talking about listening in terms of active listening and focus and empathy. And there was a really interesting article that came out, I think, just 2 days ago in response to these awful terror attacks in Tunisia. And it was about, can we actually teach empathy? Can we develop empathy? And actually we are all naturally wired to be empathetic. We just don't use that muscle enough, and that we need to actually be given and take far more opportunities to practice those kinds of skills. And interestingly, in London there is going to be a empathy museum opening later this year, and they're going to have things like, you'll go into a room and you will have the opportunity to meet people that you normally would maybe not encounter or not talk to. So, I don't know, a homeless person, or someone who's been through a really difficult time, or someone that you might normally avoid, perhaps. So in order to develop these empathy skills, really, really interesting. And again, that kind of thing shows that these things are growing in terms of interest and in terms of an awareness that we need to teach these skills. I talked about this earlier on, about stress triggers. We need to understand what triggers stress. A lot of that is going to be around your brain and how your brain is responding to things. And these are some of the ways that you can actually control your stress. And it's through practicing mindfulness. It's through getting enough sleep. is through slowing down, keeping a journal, reflection, those kinds of things. And I actually teach mindfulness, and I will take people through a mindfulness exercise just so they can be exposed to what that does. So 5 minutes of mindfulness a day gives you huge energy and relaxes you as well. Lots and lots of really, really good things. Don't be afraid of using mindfulness in the classroom. Why not? It's something, again, that's growing, and people are starting to use it more and more. And it gives you a chance to have some mindfulness time as well. So don't be afraid to use that in the classroom. I said earlier on, reflection is really, really important. If you are doing any kind of work around self-development, you must include a possibility for people to reflect. Any exercise can be used as an opportunity to develop these kinds of skills, as long as we create time for reflection. This next slide has some very simple, I'm not going to go through this, but you'll have it on the link afterwards, but these are some very simple ways that you can process an exercise, any kind of exercise. The idea is that the exercise is short. So to give you an example, I did one recently, which was basically getting people to sit in a circle, hold with their feet, hold a bowl which had a ball in it, and then they had to pass that bowl around to each other. And they did that for about, I don't know, 2 minutes, I guess, not very long, 2 minutes maybe. And then we spent about 30 or 40 minutes doing this reflection and actually, you know, getting them to really think about what was happening when they were doing that exercise. And that is where you get, whatever was going on in the exercise will be how they probably work as a team, or, you know, what they do and how they work. So you get them to reflect on that and really think about that. I'm coming up to the end of the webinar, so I'm happy to answer some questions. I know I've gone on a bit longer, but you know, I could talk about this all day actually. But can I take, if you've got any questions that you want to ask me just before we finish? Somebody asked about what do you do if you've got people, if you're trying to set up a team activity and you've got people who don't want to work as in a team. And what I would say about that is that it depends what your motive is for the team activity. So if you're actually wanting people to reflect on their softer skills, I would allow them to not necessarily take part, but I would then use that as an opportunity for them to reflect, you know, what was going on in terms of why they weren't taking part, and to really think about that. If it's a child, I think it's harder. So I think you can encourage them as much as you possibly can. Maybe get them to work with another child, or create a situation where it's safer for them to take part in that particular activity. It'll depend a lot on what the activity is and what the context is and where that's coming from, because not wanting to take part in a team activity is usually related to, if you trace it back, usually related to fear. So thinking about where does that fear come from, and being aware of that, and how can you bring somebody more into it. With language skills, you know, you can get people to reflect just with one word. You know, you just say, what's one word that helps describe how you feel? Or even no words, just get them to draw a picture. You know, they can make something, or they can draw a picture which somehow depicts how they're feeling about that activity. And then you can use that. And then you might actually get them talking, you know, because they'll want to then say something about that. I find when people make things, they always want to talk about what they've made. So if you've got shy people who don't want to talk, get them to make something. I've got a couple of next steps here. So just to quickly say about, you know, I run a website which supports teachers and trainers with these kinds of skills, and that's the Unimental one. It's a free membership site, and I also have a book which looks at these skills more. And at the moment, what I'm doing is I'm licensing trainers and teachers to offer these skills, to develop these skills in others and offer these skills. So if you're interested, do get in touch. I do have a licensed trainer operating in Spain Jill Layton, and she might be one of the first people to perhaps work with teachers developing some of these skills. I don't know, but if you're interested, you know, you can take that further. Thank you very much. I hope I've given you lots to think about, and I hope I've developed your confidence for working on these skills, both in yourself and with your students. Thank you for all the thank yous. It's lovely to see all the thank yous. It's really, really nice. And thank you for listening today and for taking part. And I guess that you'll get the link to the slides afterwards. And Henry, I'm going to put together just a summary resource sheet with some further reading and some other things that you can go and have a look at, you know, around some things I've been talking about. So I'll send that to you as well. Yes, go off and be mindful. But by the way, being mindful doesn't mean necessarily sitting there and breathing deeply. It can just mean doing something mindfully. Okay? So if you're going to go and bake a cake, you can bake mindfully, or you can drink a cup of tea mindfully. Just do that one thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. Great job, and lots of lovely comments coming in, as you've seen. Just to confirm, because people were asking, yes, the slides are all going to be available for you to download as well too. So Emma, unless there's any more questions, you can now say goodbye to everybody.
Okay, goodbye everyone. Thank you so much. I will send that resource sheet to Henry, and then he can send it all on to you. Thank you very, very much. Thank you for all the lovely comments as well. It's really lovely. Wish I could meet you all. Thank you.
Okay. Bye, Emma. Thank you again.
Bye. Bye.
So thanks for joining us today, everyone. There's over 150 people logged in, which is brilliant, and a nice spread of countries too. I'm going to stop the recording, but